forward, Trump threatened Pence, saying he would criticize him publicly. I'm going to have to say you did a great disservice. Smith is using this as evidence for what later became a coup case. In other words, not that there was some riot, not that all these things happened separately, but that the great disservice here was that Trump was knowingly pushing forward plots to both have the storming of the Capitol, which we all witnessed, but also put Pence in danger. Pence's Secret Service detail was alerted over that very item. And Jack Smith also shows Pence trying to sort of deal with Trump in those weeks after the election, say November 12th, Pence telling Trump at a private lunch that you don't have to concede, but you do have to recognize the process is over. Then, that was from Jack Smith's evidence, wherever that comes from, the grand jury interviews or other materials. It doesn't say, it's still redacted as to sourcing. But then we do know from the Pence book that he tried to encourage Trump as a friend and basically said, you took a dying political party, you gave it a new lease on life. December 21st, I should say, Pence encouraging Trump not to look at the election as a loss, but more of an intermission. This is now criminal evidence. There's also the post-election period, and votes were being tabulated, and a campaign employee. So this goes to, again, the plots that Trump unleashed. He didn't do it all himself. I've shown you before how these plots sort of metastasize. In the new material we have in the filing, a Trump campaign aide basically encouraging unrest or violence, suggesting there was about to be unrest reminiscent of the Brooks Brothers riot. That's a reference all the way back to the problems in the 2000 recount, and the staffer replies, make them riot, do it. Another moment also highlights how Trump wanted to hold on to power even if illegally, suggesting he would fight to remain in power regardless of any victory or loss. In other words, he wanted to hold on to power separate from the outcome of the election. This is damning evidence when you're trying to show that he defrauded the United States to steal the election. Telling his family, it doesn't matter if you won or lost the election, you still have to fight like hell. There's also information in here about the co-conspirators. You may recall that Jack Smith took a very specific strategy. The people you see on your screen were not all charged. They were named as co-conspirators. I told you he slightly narrowed the case. The black box is for a person who has been removed in response to the Supreme Court ruling, basically that one of those plots might be enough of an official act that it is now out of the case. But there is a new face that we can show you today. Trump lawyer Christina Bobb is co-conspirator number 6 based on the evidence in here, and that was the last person who had not been identified. So this filing, now unsealed, basically outlines the tactics and methods that Trump was using, not only to confuse or to lie to people, and again, politicians may lie in public without it being a crime, but to turn it into a larger blueprint. And that's another important point tonight. Nicole was just discussing why this is such a big deal, what the evidence is, and we are going through the legal evidence with you now, and I've got guests on hand for that. But we're also looking at a blueprint. It failed once. President-elect Biden was sworn in, you know that. But that doesn't mean they haven't tried to improve upon it. In other words, some people broke with Trump over January 6th in the Republican Party, even in his own staff. And I have more on that tonight. Other people, though, looked at this and said, oh, maybe the Republican Party doesn't need to win elections at all if they can just pull this off differently next time. And that's why today's evidence, which we didn't necessarily know we would have all this at this moment, connects with something that we didn't know we'd have from last night, where Tim Walz and J.D. Vance in the debate, partly discussing the past, zeroed in on something important about the future. If J.D. Vance, the running mate seeking your vote, seeking power, cannot still, as of last night, acknowledge who won the last election and how this all works, why would you trust him with power next time if he's still building on the big lie? Vance unable to acknowledge the fact Trump lost.
This was a threat to our democracy in a way that we had not seen. And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's inability to say. He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
A damning non-answer about an issue that is front and center as the person at the top of Vance's ticket awaits a federal trial with this very filing I'm telling you about. We're joined now by former Watergate prosecutor Nick Ackerman and Washington bureau chief for Mother Jones, MSNBC contributor David Korn. Welcome to both of you. David, what do you see as new and or significant here?
Well, there's a lot of new evidence that you put forward a moment ago. But to me, it's like the big picture. Look at what the Supreme Court did to help Donald Trump. By saying he had immunity and getting involved in this case at that level, they postponed it. And imagine if this was a trial going on now, if all this information was coming out in a court in which Trump had to be there. I mean, we see again and again in this filing, and we've seen it in the past, Donald Trump was repeatedly told that the issues that he was raising about fraud, about dead voters, non-registered voters, was all BS, and yet he kept repeating. And he was being told this by his own campaign lawyers, his own intimate advisors, and yet he just kept pushing this big lie. I mean, that's the thing that this new filing shows us. The creation of the big lie and Donald Trump's utter disregard for the truth. It is just a practice, a multiple strata of conspiracy based on wide-ranging deceit. And so the Supreme Court did him a big favor by making sure this wouldn't get a trial before the election. We may never get a trial, but it again reminds us of all the details, all the various ways he plotted with others to overturn the election, and it was all based on lies.
Yeah, Nick, as a prosecutor who's dealt with government cases, what do you see here?
Oh, absolutely. This is a very detailed response to the Supreme Court. For example, with Mike Pence, there was the issue about whether or not he would put in the fake electors. And the Supreme Court kind of viewed that in, just in a sort of by itself, and wanted to know what were the circumstances surrounding this. And what struck me in reading through this is that right from the beginning, right after they lost the election, there was discussion about the fact that Trump wanted to basically take the position that he won the election, and it was all based on fraud.
Does it matter that the special counsel is saying the evidence trails all the way up to Trump, that he was aware of the electoral plot and these other things, that he can't, according to Jack Smith at least, say, oh, I guess I had some overzealous aides out in the States?
No, absolutely not. I mean, this just shows his knowledge straight through this. If there's one takeaway from all of this, in every single little episode that's laid out here on all 165 pages, what you're seeing is evidence of Donald Trump's knowledge, knowing that he was lying, knowing that he lost, and basically doing things that hurt a lot of people, including the two women in Georgia, the election workers, Rusty Bowers, who is also mentioned in here. I mean, what's hard right now at this point, because it just came out, is trying to separate out what we already knew from what we hadn't heard about before. Clearly, the Pence stuff is new. There's some other things in there, some other emails that are new that really show Donald Trump's knowledge. We also know that Ronna McDaniels, there's some new information about what they learned from her, probably in the grand jury, that's in there that has to do directly with Donald Trump and her telling Donald Trump that there was no way he could win Michigan. It was gone. So this is really a powerful piece of a filing that, unfortunately for Donald Trump, has come just days before the election by his own doing, because he's the one that brought this motion in the first place and has been trying to delay it, and it's finally going to catch up with him.
Yeah. David, I'm curious what you think about the fact that they tried really hard, but it didn't work. And that's something that they've, I would say, very duplicitously, deceitfully tried to invoke as an advantage. J.D. Vance last night, his basic point was, after the violence, there was a period of nonviolence, and after the failed coup, there was a period of transition of power. Sure, everybody knows that. But, if O.J. Simpson says after he killed two people, he was very nonviolent the next day, that's not a good legal defense, but it might cloud it in the court of public opinion. And I'm curious what you think about that with the fraudulent electors plot, which we were just discussing, because they clearly knew at the time that it was illicit or illegal. Reading from the unsealed filing, as late as early January, these co-conspirators, Smith writes, attempted to keep the full nature of the fraudulent elector plan secret. one co-conspirator writing to another, careful with your texts, no reason to text things about electors to anyone but another co-conspirator and me, and then, oh, I'm probably a big paranoid, ha, showing that even amidst what Jack Smith calls these crimes, and several states have charged the elector plot, there's still a little low-key text vibes, David. But I'm curious how you think of that, not only legally, but for the country, because someone watching the debate last night might have been superficially drawn to the argument that we did have a transfer of power. Of course, it only came after the violence.
You know, I'm glad you brought that tweet out, that text out, because that caught my attention too. Remember, these are lawyers doing this. You know, they're plotting. They know they're breaking the law. They suspect they're breaking the law. They want to keep it quiet. This is all corruption from top and down flowing from Donald Trump. And again, the level of detail and the amount of effort they put into this. Jack Smith lays out 3 different conspiracies that happened here. The first to claim fraud and try to fight it in the courts, which failed. Then trying to go after the voting machines with crazy conspiracy theories. And then finally the elector plot. So they kept trying again and again and again. And then it led to the riot. And J.D. Vance was completely disingenuous last night. Oh, everything worked out fine. He left office on January 20th, as if that was a big win for the country. You don't get credit for leaving office after you lose. And it just showed the amount of energy and somewhat imagination that Donald Trump and others put into this. And you'd have to imagine, you'd have to assume that their natures, their souls have not changed in the last 4 years, and therefore be worried about what they're going to do this time, particularly with the knowledge they have and they gained and learned from what they did and failed with last time.
Yeah. David Corn and Nick Ackerman on the hefty filing. We have a lot more on it tonight in this program. I should mention a programming note. Rachel, Chris, and Lawrence doing this special as part of a special edition of All In tonight, so you can see it's a big news night. The other thing that comes through in this, and we're going to get into this with some very special guests, is that none of this is over. The case takes time. Building a case takes sometimes months or years, and then holding a trial, as we were just reminded with the Supreme Court involved, can take even longer. But this is all about what's happening right now, as we are weeks away from an election where one side has a leader, Donald Trump, and some aides around him who say they are still hell-bent on getting power whether they win the election or not. And that's why the clash in last night's debate was so important. So we are going to take a look next at Donald Trump's conspiracies, the criminality, the campaign, and why it matters for 2024. I have that breakdown and more on this filing next.
I was so excited to buy my first home, but I needed a lot of work done on it. I went on to Angie. Jamie was the first person to call.
I explained to her some of the things I could do and showed her some pictures.
He's resurfaced my flooring. He's done plumbing work. He's refinished this beautiful table here.
We just had to sand it for a week.
Well, we didn't. He did.
With top-rated certified pros in over 500 categories, Angie can connect you with the right pro for any home project. Find top-rated certified pros in your area at Angie.com.
When my hair started to thin, I thought, am I going to have any hair left?
After I gave birth, my hair wasn't even thinning, it was gone.
When I spoke to my dermatologist, he immediately pointed me in the direction of Nutrafol.
It's 100% drug-free and clinically tested.
Within 3 months, my hair was fuller.
It's longer, it's so much thicker.
I had more scalp coverage.
It was so nice to be noticed for my hair after hiding it for so many years.
Start your hair growth journey at Nutrafol.com.
Whether it's your future health, your future income,